Welcome to the Future of Life Institute podcast. My name is Gus Docker, and I'm here with Andrea Miotti, who is the director and founder of Control AI, which is a nonprofit working to reduce catastrophic risks from artificial intelligence. Andrea, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you very much. Thank you for having me.
Fantastic. You have a new report called A Narrow Path, which is about exactly this topic, how to prevent catastrophic risk. What is the narrow path?
So what we lay out in this report is a plan for humanity to survive superintelligence and thrive and flourish beyond that. There's one key threat that we deal with. It's the development of artificial superintelligence, AI that is smarter than humans across a general range of tasks. In many cases, it could be smarter than all humans combined. And this is something that, for some people could be far away, but increasingly, there's a concern that this might be coming quite soon. There are definitely a handful of companies investing tens of billions of dollars, soon hundreds of billions, to make this happen. And the thing is, if we develop superintelligence right now, as many experts warned us, now even newly minted Nobel Prizes, but also CEOs of the very companies developing this technology, world leaders like the previous UK Prime Minister Rishi Sunak, we face an extinction risk. And we need to chart a different path. This is what we tried to do here, to chart a path where humanity keeps the benefits of AI as a tool to empower humans, as a tool to provide economic growth in applications that help us, but not as a successor species, not as an entity more powerful than us that overpowers us.
Yeah, I guess the recommendations in this report depends on when we think we will have something like AGI or even more advanced systems like superintelligence. And you give an estimate of within 3 to 15 years. What is the ground for that estimate?
Yeah, so the ground for that estimate is a combination of general estimates from people in the field. We've had recently Sam Altman, CEO of OpenAI, estimating something that is roughly 3 plus years in his view for superintelligence in a recent blog post. And 15 years is kind of a time scale where in case the current scaling paradigm doesn't work too much or slows down, there will still be a lot of algorithmic improvements and other advances that will still give us gains during that period. But ultimately, I don't think that the exact time frame matters that much. Like, we kind of expect that this technology might be developed relatively soon, especially soon for governments' timescales. We know governments are not that quick at many things. Even 5 to 10 year time frame is a challenging deadline when you're facing extinction. So the reality is that this is coming. We don't know exactly when it's coming. Predicting the future is hard, but we need to plan. And we need to plan now. If it comes in 3 years, we're going to be in real trouble. And even if it comes in 15 years, we're still going to be in real trouble unless we plan.
The timing matters, but it doesn't matter in a deep sense. What matters most is that we have an unsolved problem of how to align and control these systems, how to understand these systems. And if that problem isn't solved before we develop the advanced systems, then we might be in trouble. So maybe you could tell us about how much do we understand about AI systems currently, and how is the understanding that you would like to see before we develop superintelligence different from the understanding we have?
Yeah, so as you said, a big issue with AI, especially these advanced, powerful AI systems, is that we understand them in many ways very little. And we are approaching this without some scientific foundations that we did have for other large-scale transformative technologies. For intelligence, we have neither science of intelligence that lets us make predictions about, if you put this amount of computing power and this amount of data, what will you get? And we don't even have a metrology, a measurement science of intelligence. We don't even have a yardstick to be okay, well, clearly GPT-4 is as smart as 2 human beings and as smart as 10 mice. We do have a deep intuition as humans of we look at a rock and we think that's probably around 0 intelligence or, some amount, but very little. A flower is clearly more than a rock. It can take some limited amount of interaction with its environment. A mouse is more than a flower. We are seeing AI systems that can do very complex things, but are they, as kind of quote, LeCun, are they cat level? Are they dog level? are they human level? Without a measurement science, we're just making guesses and unanchored guesses. And the reality is, intelligence is not magical. Intelligence is just the ability to accomplish goals. It's a physical phenomenon like any other phenomenon that we have in our physical universe. And we were in this situation with other things in science before, like temperature wasn't, like a clear measure of temperature wasn't developed until just a few centuries ago. And it just took people to do empirical experimentation and drawing up scales to actually measure this, clearly tangible phenomenon that we didn't have real measures for. And once we had those measures, then we could make clear predictions and clear, drawing the line, understanding different levels and so on. We will need the same for intelligence to be able to actually predict in advance, not just after deployment or, even sometimes never, but to predict it before we build it. How powerful is it going to be? What's it going to be capable of doing? What is it not going to be capable of doing? These are the foundations needed to be able to control such a powerful technology, to know in advance, to predict what it's going to do.
So regular listeners to this show will know about scaling laws, and these laws seem to be something that we can use to predict AI capabilities in advance. In fact, you just mentioned them as something that, when we scale up compute, we expect to see certain capabilities arise. Why are these scaling laws not enough for us to have a good understanding of how AI capabilities emerge?
Yeah, so scaling laws are definitely helpful, but they're ultimately empirical observations. They're not kind of fundamental laws grounded in theory like we would have in physics or other more mature disciplines. And the proof is in the fact that people aware of scaling laws still cannot predict in advance what their models will be able to do. Like they can roughly see that given 1 order of magnitude more of computing power, you will get a more powerful system, but they're not able to predict exactly at this level the AI is going to be able to use coding at this level of human performance. At this level, the AI will start to persuade humans at this level. There are no such precise predictions being made, and this is actually the kind of things that we could get if we had a deeper theory of intelligence and an actual measurement of intelligence. So you can see how many people put it, and that's correct. Compute is a very good proxy. It's kind of the best we have, given that we don't have the actual measure, the actual yardstick for intelligence. We use compute as one of the main proxies to approximate it, but it's still a proxy, and we can't always rely on it. And there are many other areas that can improve even while keeping compute constant. Things like algorithmic improvements, things like just switching to the chinchilla scaling laws compared to the previous scaling laws led to massive improvements in performance, even given the same amount of computing power. Things like OpenAI's recent model O1 that uses a lot more inference compute rather than training compute to kind of essentially post-process its outputs and make them better. That's not really well captured by just training compute proxy. So we need to go beyond. It's a very useful tool, but we need to go beyond that. We need to have a defense-in-depth approach to AI policy that doesn't just rely on compute thresholds.
And that is actually what you lay out in A Narrow Path. I think before we get too deep into this interview, I would love for you to lay out the 3 phases of A Narrow Path, what you would like the world to do in each phase.
Yeah, absolutely. So kind of as we covered so far, we focus on one specific threat model, superintelligence. AI smarter than any human or smarter than most humans combined. This is, the explicit goal of some companies. It's the explicit goal of people developing this technology. And if we don't put safeguards in place, the default outcome of that development is human extinction. So what do we do about that? Well, we chart a path of 3 phases. Phase 0, faced with this threat, the first thing we need to do is to stop dying, stop losing. If we develop this right now, it's game over. Until we have the safeguards in place, until we know how to control it, we just cannot afford to develop superintelligence. Everybody loses if we do. It's not going to be the victory of one nation over another, one company over another. Humanity loses. The only winner is superintelligence. So in that phase, the goal is safety, preventing the development of superintelligence for at least 20 years. Then beyond that, if we do succeed at building our defenses and building beneficial AI tools while preventing superintelligence. Then we will face another issue, which is international competition, intercompany competition, rogue actors trying to develop this technology. We need to make an international system that is stable and where if we get these measures implemented, they don't just collapse under competition and pressure. And this is why the goal of phase one is stability, building an international AI oversight system that is stable and beneficial for all participants. And finally, once we are safe, we're not dead and we're not going to die anytime soon. We have a stable international system. So we have a way to prevent rogue actors. We also have a way to keep major AI players together rather than escalating into an arms race on AI. Then we can look into building a flourishing future. So the goal of phase two is flourishing, develop transformative AI, not superintelligence, but transformative AI as a tool to benefit humanity and to achieve all of the economic growth and scientific potential that we do want from AI and we can get from AI if we get all of these things right.
This is an alternative plan compared to the plan of the leaders of the AGI corporations. Why isn't it that what they're doing will work? So, for example, why won't reinforcement learning from human feedback, which is the currently dominant technique, why isn't that enough to keep us safe and to keep AI models aligned to our values? For example, when I use ChatGPT, it seems relatively helpful and aligned to me. Why won't that just continue to be the case?
In two parts, specifically about reinforcement learning from human feedback. That's a plan that I think even the companies themselves do not expect will scale to superintelligence. They're just quite upfront about it. When I use ChatGPT, I'm pretty happy with the answers I get. But what these companies are building is not more chatbots. If we only had chatbots, we would have some things to worry about, but not at this scale. The reality is that what the development is going towards and is already being built for is to have, generalist agents, AIs as agents that take actions in the real world autonomously on their own, connected. They already are, connected to tools, connected to the internet, and so on. And what RLHF ultimately is it's essentially kind of training the model with a stick and with some reward. It's like, it's like having an animal that you don't really understand, and whenever it does something nice, you give it a candy, and whenever it does something that you don't like, you just hit it with a stick. It's not very nice, but that's how RLHF works. It doesn't tell you much about internally how the system is representing this information and this learning. It's not telling you whether the system will just go and do something else when it's in a different environment in the real world and you couldn't predict. And ultimately, it doesn't even address a lot of the fundamental issues that come with scaling to superintelligence. Things like using AIs to improve other AIs, or like having these AIs act autonomously in the real world. This will lead to the AI itself changing, to like next generation of AI changing. This is a very, very limited way to deal with that. But I would say at a kind of a bigger picture level, I am not sure I have seen even a plan from the companies. Like I've seen, maybe concepts of a plan, things like RLHF, but I don't think the companies are quite public, at least with their plans, if they have them at all. The plan seems to be, let's continue building superintelligence and let's see what happens. And, we will dedicate some of our budget to doing some safety research, but deployment comes first and, release comes first anyways. Even then, even if one of them figures out the way to keep the systems controlled, how are they going to make sure that the other companies don't just deploy the dangerous system, right? Like that's not a single company issue to solve. It's not even a single country issue to solve. Maybe you can get all the companies in one country to go follow the solution to this problem that has been found. No, not found yet, but found in the future. What about another country where they're just developing the same thing? How do you make them do that? How do you make sure? And this is why we need a plan that goes also just beyond the technical solution. The technical solution is part of the problem, and we need it urgently, especially on this tight deadline. But there are a lot of governance and policy questions at a national and global level that are just left undone, and we need to do them fast.
We do seem to be in this tragic situation where there is, say, an AGI corporation developing more and more advanced systems, and in response, another corporation arises where their claim is, we will do this more responsibly. We won't race ahead. And then you suddenly get this proliferation of companies competing with each other, where each is created in response to the other ones not acting responsibly.
Yeah, it's quite ironic.
It's a big irony, it seems. Yeah.
You even have the ones that start having safe in the name to, and they come to tell you, well, if it has safe in the name, it's gonna be fine, right?
Yeah. You're referring to Ilya Sutskever's Safe Superintelligence Incorporated. Yeah.
Exactly.
All right, so phase 0 is about safety, and there the plan is to prevent the development of superintelligence for 20 years. Where does that number come from? Why 20 years? Why not 5 years? Why not 50 years?
This number is essentially a forcing function. It's a way, like it's very, very often in policy, one ends up going on vague ideas or ideas that are difficult to operationalize. Like first of all, putting a number forces you to check. This is why we put a number to check, okay, if I actually assess all of these measures and they all are all in place, do I expect this actually stops it for 20 years or not? It lets you do the exercise more like solving a mathematical proof exercise rather than having a general feeling of whether things are going to help on the margin or not. Then, why 20 specifically? It takes a long time for governments to do things. So some people might think that 20 is too little. I definitely know a few. Some people might think that 20 is too much. I think generally people that know how long it takes to build institutions and build new foundations for science, I think generally are on the side of it might even be too little. But if you might, you can kind of speed run the whole process and set up new international institutions, very robust safety policies at a national level in all major AI players, achieve global coordination on this, and build the foundations for, scientific foundations for building safe transformative AI, then we can do this in less than 20 years. But I think we should account, number one, for these things are hard and take time, and we cannot afford to miss the deadline. And second of all, planning fallacy. It takes a long time, and it's quite complicated to get agreement on a lot of things. It's possible. We have done it before, but it's quite complicated. And I think 20 years gives us a good window to still take. Also, this doesn't mean stopping other AI development. In these 20 years, we will have massive transformation. Like a society with no superintelligence is still a society where, the vast majority of labor will be automated at current rates. It's a society where we will have a completely different education environment, a completely different work environment in the next 5 to 10 years, even without superintelligence.
It's a very important point. I think it's worth stressing that what Control AI, your organization, is against is not all AI development. It is this development specifically of superintelligence. And so, yeah, this is not about shutting down all AI development. It is about this specific issue.
Exactly.
And it seems to be, at least in principle, that we should not develop superintelligence for as long as it takes to solve the problems we need to solve. So solving the problem of understanding these systems and aligning these systems. But I can see the point in having this 20 years when you're not developing such a system as something for people to coalesce around. And I take it that this is the reason for 20 years specifically.
Yes, exactly.
The first objection that comes up when you propose something like this is that setting up international institutions that will control what everyone on Earth can do, specifically that they can't develop superintelligence, that is a level of kind of authoritarian control that we simply can't accept. And so weighing that risk, the risk of authoritarian control over technological development against the risk of superintelligence, some people might come down on the side of we need to prevent this control from being implemented.
Well, I think sometimes people get a bit ideological on these issues, also because they forget that we live in a world where you cannot just build a nuke in your backyard, right? Like we already have these things, and for good reason, and they have nothing to do with international totalitarianism or similar. Like you cannot build biological weapons, you cannot build a nuke in your backyard, and we're very happy that you cannot do that, because otherwise we will be in a very unstable world. The world is made of trade-offs. Like obviously, I'm not going to just lie and say there are no trade-offs. Like obviously there is a trade-off between speed and safety. Sometimes there is a trade-off between security and proliferation, and we need to be, to make mature decisions as countries, as individuals, and as civilizations to take these trade-offs in a way that maximizes our collective gain, our collective benefit. The reality is that if we just rush ahead right now and anybody on the planet can just develop superintelligence, we will die, or we're quite likely to die. I believe we will die. Some people are skeptical, but the fundamental reality is that if we have the system set up like that, it's utterly unstable. It's not going to be possible to prevent all risks that come from it, and so we need to find a different path. We have found one with the nuclear weapons. Again, it's thanks to the efforts that countries like the US and scientists on both sides of the Iron Curtain did, that we have a stable nuclear international system. It has a lot of flaws, right? But we're still alive today. There could be a different world where there was a massive nuclear war after World War II, and me and you and everybody else listening wouldn't be around here today to talk about this stuff. So we did manage to do it with other extinction level technologies. We also, as a civilization, if everything goes well and we succeed, we'll keep building bigger and bigger technologies. That's great, but also they come with more and more responsibility. The bigger the technology you build, the more the downside risks, the more the blast radius of it is going to increase. And if every time we build a technology, we just distribute it everywhere with no safeguards to everybody all the time, this is a recipe for a civilization that doesn't make it at some point. You just need one or two or very few actors to screw it up for everybody else. And if we are to become a civilization, even greater than what we are right now, and explore the stars and live healthy and long lives, at much larger scale than we do right now, we need to grapple with these fundamental questions, and we need to be able to deal with technologies that affect everybody on the planet.
Right now, it's difficult for me to imagine a technology that could be as transformative as superintelligence. But I can imagine a period, say, after we develop superintelligence, where we suddenly are faced with a bunch of new technologies, and some of these technologies could be destructive. So it seems like a very good idea to have set up a system for handling such technologies at an international level. You sketch out what the conditions for achieving safety would look like. And I would like us to go through each of them, because these are actions you could take while developing AI that will be especially dangerous. And the first one of these is that we do not want AIs to be improving AIs. Do you think this is to some extent already happening, and how do we prevent it from advancing further?
Yeah, so this one is a crucial one, and kind of to give the full picture. The reason for this one is that whatever safeguards you put in place, whatever limits you put in place on AI development, if AIs can improve themselves or can be used to improve AIs, it's very easy for them to now break out of these limits, of these bounds that you put in place, and that's going to nullify any defenses that you've put in place. So we put it as a necessary condition to have a safety regime that works, because this just trivializes kind of any defense you have in place if you let it happen. Some amount of this is happening. Now, in our policy, we worked a lot to try to find a measure that is, really surgical and affects the most dangerous forms of AIs, improving AIs, while also leaving a lot of, beneficial normal software untouched. So sometimes you need to make trade-offs, but when you can't find a precise way, it's even better. So for doing this, we coined the idea of found systems. So there's sometimes in common parlance, we use AI to talk about a lot of different things. But there's kind of two kinds of AI that are intuitively quite different. There's normal software that humans like me or you write down. And then there's this, in some ways, quite strange form of AIs, which are a lot of things like ChatGPT or modern large language models that are not really designed or written by humans, but they're kind of grown. They're found via mathematical optimization. This is why we call them found systems. And this, is one of the reasons why they're so inscrutable for us in many reasons. It's because we don't just design them. We don't just draw them out and have a plan for them, but we just find them via mathematical optimization. And also, these are the ones that are most concerning and most dangerous because we don't have good ways to understand them and bound them, to understand in advance what's the limits or what they will be able to do, and what's going on inside them, and how can we limit in which directions they grow. And so for no AIs improving AIs, we focus on no found systems, so no AIs grown AIs improving other grown AIs. Why? If we have AIs improving AIs at machine speed, there is very little way for humans to actually keep up with what's going on. They're much faster than us. We don't even understand them right now. Imagine in an intelligence explosion where they keep improving themselves or improving other AIs. And that's a recipe for disaster and for having an uncontrolled intelligence explosion that we just cannot follow. While we're happy with, we want to leave a lot of normal applications like humans improving AIs, or like humans using handwritten code to optimize other handwritten code. With the way that we spell out the policy, we find a way to leave that untouched.
So what would be excluded here would be, for example, a researcher at OpenAI using a language model to help him generate code and then using that code to improve their systems. But would you also exclude, say, NVIDIA using AI for chip design?
In this case, yes, we don't cover using AI for chip design. For the case of the OpenAI employee, that's quite interesting. So, obviously, laws are an exercise in trying to, bring precision, but you can go infinitely deep with legal definitions, and there's always going to be edge cases. So the clear case that we want to prevent is having, GPT-4 considerably help with the development of GPT-5. That's not what we want to see happening. What we are clearly not covering is things like using Otter AI to record this meeting and transcribe it and then review it, or to record an AI development meeting and transcribe it and review it. Of course, the reality is that things are always on a spectrum. Right now, we already see companies, despite, I think Sam Altman said at some point that recursive self-improvement is something that's so dangerous, OpenAI would never do it. Yet, in practice, we do see that in companies right now, like Anthropic and like OpenAI, they do say that they use their own current systems to speed up their machine learning engineers for the development of the future systems. And again, this is a spectrum. It's always difficult to draw a line. Obviously, the more this is done and the more this is delegated to the machine that we don't understand, the more this is dangerous. And so, we need a policy that kind of says, no, the full recursive self-improvement with machines is not allowed. You should have protocols in place to prevent this. You should teach your employees that this is something very dangerous that you shouldn't do. And then, for the edge cases, we have courts and we have discussions to find exactly how they work.
Yeah, makes sense. Another development that could be dangerous is if you allow systems to break out of their environments. Maybe you could describe how could this happen, and isn't this a case where this isn't even in the interest of the AGI corporations themselves? So perhaps there's some room for agreement here.
Yeah, so this is another one of these conditions that is really foundational, because similarly to AIs improving AIs, whatever limits you put in place to limit the power and the danger of AI systems, if the AI is capable of just breaking out of their virtual or physical environment, they're going to nullify all of your countermeasures. So again, if the AI can just open his room and leave the room and do something else, then your room is useless. If your prisoner can just open the jail cell, that the jail cell is useless. In this case, this is something that, ironically, I was developing this policy. I thought of it, I thought it could happen quite soon, but I could not expect that in September, this essentially was reported in the O1 model card. That during the OpenAI testing of O1, O1 did something similar to this. There's contention whether there's always contention whether it's exactly breaking out or not. This is why we need clear rules put by the third parties and having third-party inspectors decide and adjudicate, not just the companies themselves. But in this case, the model essentially was given a computer security challenge, a capture the flag challenge to solve. The challenge was broken in a certain way, and the model realized, I still want to solve it. So it found a way to gain kind of root access to the virtual machine where it was going on, start a new environment, and then solve the challenge in that new environment. it essentially broke out of one level of boundary, not all of them. It didn't, it didn't leave the server, but it broke out of one level of boundary that was set up for it to solve a challenge that was impossible otherwise. So this is very concerning. If you have a system that is this capable and you put safeguards in place, you're gonna, the system can just find a way to just break out of them and leave and nullify all of your safeguards. So, and indeed, this shouldn't be in the interest of the companies to have this happen. But again, there are trade-offs. The more power, the more raw power and the more raw access you give to your AI systems, the more in the short term you might feel like you have an economic incentive. Yeah, it's just doing whatever it thinks it's best. It just has access to everything. It can solve all of your problems. The other side of that is, yes, with complete free access and complete no restrictions, then the risks are really severe and you nullify all of the other safety measures. So we need the common sense approach of no AIs that can break out of their environment, make sure that they cannot, build your environment in a way that doesn't make this possible. And the burden of proof should be on the company to show that they're not developing these types of models intentionally. If they find this, they find a way to remove this ability or constrain it. And if they cannot, well, this shouldn't be around.
The case you mentioned from the O1 model card is like a miniature version of what we might expect with more powerful models. You can imagine something like a hedge fund deploying a model that's trading and giving it a bunch of access to their systems, and the model beginning to do something that is not within the bounds of what they expected. So trading more money or breaking laws or something like that. That's a much more large scale. That doesn't seem out of the question for me. And I also think we will, so both professionals, but also kind of the broad public will begin to give these systems more and more access. So you will probably be tempting to give these systems access to your email, to your calendar, and just in those very kind of limited circumstances, with that access, what could a model be capable of doing? Could a model buy more compute power for itself on Amazon or something like that? But do you worry less about this because, again, it might be in the interest of the companies themselves to prevent this? I mean, this isn't in the interest of me as a consumer, for example, or even the people who run the hedge fund would face legal trouble because their model escaped from the boundaries that it was believed to be operating within.
Well, I think this is precisely why we need to have these as rules, not just as kind of general incentives. I mean, in theory, everybody has an incentive not to go extinct from AI, yet, and this risk is even recognized by the companies developing some of the most powerful models, yet this is still happening, right? So if we just rely on incentives, and we could also make incentives stronger. Like there's a strong case for liability, because liability aligns, the incentives of the developer with having to prevent these kind of things from happening in the first place. Otherwise, they will face penalties. This is exactly the approach here. The approach here is to say, here are some conditions that we actually need to enforce. We can't just rely on the goodwill of companies. Even if all companies are well-intentioned, competitive pressures, rogue actors, accidents will happen unless there are protocols in place, rules in place, ways in place to mitigate this. And we just need to make it actually compulsory. And like it has happened with many other industries, this will quickly improve the situation and make sure that these things actually don't happen.
What is an unbounded AI and why is that dangerous?
Another one of our conditions is no unbounded AIs. And I know the name of this one is a little bit arcane, but I will try to make it clear. So the idea here is that in almost any high-risk engineering sector, we actually know in advance, before even developing a system or building a system. Think of like a nuclear power plant. You can sketch out or building a plane that needs to fly and not kill a bunch of people. The developers and the builders are going to sketch out a blueprint that is going to have a lot of assumptions and a lot of calculations on exactly how this thing will fail, what are the safety margins, what amount of pressure this can withstand. In the case of a bridge, you need to know in advance, and you can know in advance if you make your calculations, how many cars can it withstand before it's going to collapse. And we kind of, in many ways, we expect that this is happening with everything that we deal with. But AI is very strange. It's an industry that's kind of developed without all of these basic and normal common sense engineering practices, where developers don't even know before finishing the training run what their AIs can do, and don't even design them in many ways, right? We've talked about how they're kind of grown rather than designed, and just discover capabilities way after the fact, even after the model has been tested and evaluated for a week, maybe 1 year later, you still discover new capabilities and new ways that you can do stuff. And that's just essentially an untenable way to deal with safety. Like this, if this was the approach with safety for bridges or for nuclear power plants, bridges wouldn't stand and power plants would explode all the time. What we need to have is instead, AIs that before deployment, a developer should just be able to say, I can, given this conditions that I have in mind, I can expect that this AI system will be able to do this, but not that. It's quite easy for some AI systems. For example, if you have a CNN, a convolutional neural network, to scan for cancer, for example, it's quite easy to say as a developer, look, this model is only trained on cancer pictures. It's only trained on images, and it can only output text. I'm pretty confident it's not going to be able to hack other systems. It's not going to be able to generate or execute code. I'm not giving it access to anything that can execute code, and it's not going to be able to self-improve. Or let's go for bigger system like AlphaFold. That's the case about it's a very powerful system. It's a marvel of science and engineering, but it can just encode proteins. You can be quite, maybe not 100% certain. That's always hard, but you can give a very confident estimate. Like this system is bounded just to the protein folding domain. It's gonna output protein structures. It's not gonna output images. It's not gonna output other stuff, especially if we don't give it access to tools that could let it do that.
Yeah. So another way of making this, or of stating this difference, might be saying that unbounded systems are general systems, and those systems are opposed to narrow systems like AlphaFold, where you get some form of safety built in because, yes, AlphaFold is superhuman in the domain of protein folding, but it's not superhuman in other domains.
So I actually do think that it is possible to bound general systems. It just hasn't been done. In principle, it's definitely possible. Maybe not in the full limit. Again, we go back to full superintelligence. It's very hard to give it actual godlike AI. How are you going to predict its bounds? But with better understanding, there's no reason why with better interpretability or with better understanding or new ways to design and train for fully general systems, you could still give certain bounds. And in practice, what we ask for is for any capability of concerns or any capability that is considered dangerous or is illegal in a certain jurisdiction. A classic example would be increasingly most jurisdictions that will be concerned about AIs enabling the development of biological weapons or assisting with classified information about nuclear weapons. Now, if you do have if you as a developer, you have a way to demonstrate that your fully general system will not generate this information, that's great. We don't need to be prescriptive. We just companies and developers should find ways to innovate to match this. We can leave it to them. If you have a full interpretability technique that lets you do this, or a simple way could be, look, my model, I can guarantee you it has not been trained on a single, on any chemical data. It just there's no way to talk about chemistry. There's no way to talk about chemistry. It's only going to talk about other stuff. Nothing in the training data. It hasn't re-derived this from learning about the English language and so on. That's great. That's enough proof that we need. But we do need to start having these things. Otherwise, if we don't bound our systems, we also cannot bound the ways in which they can fail or act. And it breaks all of the other assumptions that we can make about them because we don't even know what the full extent of what they will be capable of doing is.
So I think here we arrive at phase one, which is about stability. And this is about how to implement a system that actually upholds the prohibitions on systems that are dangerous and we would like to avoid. So you have a number of conditions for stability also, and perhaps we could walk through those in a similar fashion. Yeah, where the first one is non-proliferation, and this, I take it that this is just about, we don't want AI systems spreading across the globe in a kind of unregulated way. How would you explain non-proliferation?
Yeah, absolutely. So in non-proliferation, and here it's a common idea in arms controls and with other powerful technologies like nuclear, where ultimately, if you have a technology that can be dangerous, or you can have a threat vector, the more people and the more countries that have access to it, the more something can go wrong. You're kind of multiplying the downside risk by the number of actors that can use it. So you need to find a way for the fundamentally dangerous systems to not proliferate across. The more there are, the harder it is to govern them, the harder it is to monitor them. And also, if they proliferate, it makes it really difficult for agreements to stay in place, because countries will start to feel like, well, I finally decided to implement safety measures and limit the development of AI in a certain way, but all of these other countries are just rushing ahead and they're getting access to it, and they are developing beyond these safeguards. Why am I limiting myself? Competitive pressures builds up over time and leads to kind of skirting the safety measures rather than following them.
Would non-proliferation set bounds on open sourcing AI?
So, well, I think the open sourcing AI question is quite an interesting one. First of all, because it's very often a misused term. There are very few, especially with the most powerful models, there are very few that actually have an actual open source license or that actually follow the principle of open source. They generally just release the weights. So I usually like to call it open weights, which is not the same as having the source code, just being able to replicate it at home. Good luck finding all of the compute that the Meta has and so on. But yeah, ultimately the reality is that for sufficiently powerful AI systems, we cannot have them spread across the planet and ungoverned. If you accept the premise that some AI systems will lead to catastrophic risks, if you have 8 billion people on the planet, and those 8 billion people on the planet include terrorists, they include, sociopaths, they include people that just want to hurt other people, they include rogue states. The moment they have access to those, then you need to find a way to remove access to those systems from them. Otherwise, you face a threat. So at a certain level of capability and at a certain level of danger, it is untenable to just have proliferation. One sad thing is that I actually do really understand the approach of many people that are in good faith, trying to concern about overreach of international measures and global surveillance. But the sad thing is, the more we proliferate powerful AI, the more the only way that we have a stable future system is with more and more surveillance. If you have nuke level technology in every house, the world is either has much more surveillance than we have right now, or we die in a nuclear war. So we should rather seek to not proliferate now and have roughly similarly powerful to what we have on nukes measures on AI that don't invade our privacy and our life, rather than Russia had to proliferate, and then the only way we have to get out is much more invasive measures. They might still be worth it because not dying is a pretty nice deal, but I would just rather have a future where we keep a lot of our privacy and we don't have dangerous technology proliferate, and then we can easily govern it in a few areas.
Which type of international structure would we need in order to prevent proliferation?
Yeah, so the structure that we propose is quite similar to what we have in place for nuclear, because there are a lot of similarities actually between AI and nuclear. Some differences, but a lot of similarities. A few of them are they're both extremely powerful technologies that are inherently dual use. You can use AI in a lot of narrow civilian beneficial applications. You can also build AI to create technology that is as powerful as nukes, if not more. Same with nuclear weapons and nuclear civilian power. They both, AI, despite being software, it's still quite reliant on a physical resource, a bit like uranium for nukes, and for AI, this is compute. So there is there are various inputs to AI, but the most important one, definitely the most governable one, is computing power. This is not just digital. These are like physical big, GPUs, big machines, big supercomputers that sit in large scale data centers. They're fairly easy to monitor. They're physical. They're large. They're expensive. And there is a very thin supply chain that produces them globally. So they're quite easy to track. And this, maps quite similarly to uranium and plutonium for nukes. A few differences are that nukes are just a weapon. They are just ultimately, even if they are extremely powerful, they're just sitting there, and the way they can go wrong is by human misuse or accident. With AI, especially with AI that many AI companies try to build, we are dealing with agents. We're dealing with essentially entities that we should model, that are much easier to model as essentially adversaries, or like a fleet of human operators, but on a computer, or a fleet of analysts, but on a computer, rather than just a kind of a static weapon. They take actions on their own. They're built to take action on their own, and they can model you like an adversary would. So they're much closer to an adversary, a foreign force, rather than just a weapon. And this is a key difference. But yeah, in terms of international structure, what we propose is very similar to what exists for nuclear. So we propose an international agency that is akin to the IAEA, so the International Atomic Agency, that would at the same time have monitoring and verification mechanisms to kind of monitor the stockpiles of compute, monitor that the safety conditions are being enforced across countries, make sure the countries have a licensing regime to themselves monitor these safety conditions, and let countries also monitor each other. Always trust, but verify. It's very important that each other are not violating these commitments. And I think this is absolutely possible, as we've done it with nukes.
Wouldn't this run into kind of the classical problem of international law, which is that we don't have strong enforcement mechanisms, and it's difficult for countries to agree? So how, for example, would the US and China agree on these kind of international structures?
Yeah, so it's worth noting that the IAEA does exist, and it works pretty well. So like, we have succeeded in some areas, in some pretty dicey areas. It's not easy. This is why this is a narrow path. I think the reality is that there are a lot of paths in front of us. This is also has been what Geoffrey Hinton this week said in his Nobel Prize response, that we are at a bifurcation point in history where we are facing this extinction level threat coming up very soon. And in the next few years, we will need to figure out whether we have plans to deal with it or not. So most of the paths are going to lead to, paths where we don't try to cooperate, or we try to cooperate and fail, or something goes wrong. They're going to lead to a bad outcome. But we need to try to go for the good outcome. And we have achieved it before. Again, the IAEA exists for nuclear weapons. The Biological Weapons Convention has prohibited biological weapons worldwide, and is, sometimes there are defections, but, all in all, we have a very limited number of biological weapons being actually used. Human cloning was a case where there was a very strong and immediate ban on a technology that would have been very, very economically and militarily and strategically valuable for countries. And this has been adopted in the US, in China, in Russia, and so on. So we do need to try. And the important thing to understand, and this is why I think some other approaches proposed in this field are either naive or disingenuous, is that the alternative to cooperation is war, and war is nuclear war. We are in a world with powerful, nuclear states, and we either find a way to cooperate and to prevent the development of superintelligence together, or the alternative is that, one country will need to force the others to prevent the development of superintelligence. And forcing a nuclear power is quite tricky. So we should test the cooperation route. And again, always trust but verify, or, sometimes not even trust, just verify. But we should test the cooperation route before going for the war route. I do not believe there is a route where somehow, one player just takes over all of the other ones, but there is no conflict. Trying to take over other countries leads to conflict. That's the definition of takeover, and that's how, international geopolitics works.
How do you trust but verify? So how do you verify? Do we have interesting technical measures or solutions for how to look at which training runs are underway in different countries and so on?
That's a very good question. The good news is that we increasingly have more of those technical solutions. Before going to the technical solutions, I do want to stress that the first step is we need the processes and institutions in place. Like, we shouldn't feel bottlenecked by the technology. The technology helps, but the kind of the foundation also for using the technology and deploying these better and better monitoring technologies are actual political agreements and deciding that the policy, is worth pursuing. Generally, despite all things, if major governments, especially governments like the US, decide to do something, it gets done. The main thing is actually decide to do something, and then we will find a way to solve it via going from the old-timey in-person monitoring via inspectors coming with a suit and with a bag to very sophisticated new technologies. The good news is that we also have more and more sophisticated new technologies. So there are a few ways. So some ways are, again, more a legacy but can still be used. So data centers are large, they consume a lot of energy, they produce a variety of signatures that are verifiable. We also propose in our plan a specific approach of limiting the total amount of flops, kind of total amount of computing power per data center, a pretty high limit, but still this is to ensure that if somebody wants to illegally break out of the limits, we have the equivalent of a nuclear breakout time that we can calculate in advance of they will need to smuggle more GPUs into that, and it will still take them, a certain number of years before being able to train such a larger model. So we can just do this right now. We don't need technologies, just by having an enforced limit on the total size of a data center, not just the total size of a single training run. In the near future, there are proposals, that are being worked on right now. There are prototypes being worked on right now. One of the various proposals is guaranteeable chips that people like Yoshua Benjo and others are working on, is to have on-chip monitoring mechanisms. This would be kind of the gold standard for mutual verification, where you can have on the chip a way to verify whether the training run is authorized, whether the entity doing the training run has still a valid license. You can verify the amount of computing power being used for the training run, a variety of other specifications that you might want to verify in this kind of mechanism. And that in many ways would be much, 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 much more visibility than we even have on nuclear. So it's an easier job once you have this kind of stuff than we do with nuclear.
Yeah, and it might be possible to get these hardware mechanisms because, as you mentioned, the supply chain is extremely concentrated into ASML and TSMC and NVIDIA as the main players. And therefore, it seems like if those players could be convinced that this would be a good thing, it might be possible. Do you worry about distributed training runs? So say instead of having one training run running in a data center with 1 million GPUs, you spread those out over 100 different data centers and thereby conceal that you're actually training an enormous model.
Yeah, so for this, that's obviously going to be one threat model from actors that are trying to defect. This does lead to a lot of inefficiencies at the moment. It's kind of naturally a big factor in training runs at the moment is interconnect speed. So kind of like how quickly does information flow between nearby GPUs. And, here you're doing it over the internet, you're doing it kind of spread out potentially globally across the jurisdictions. You will have challenges there. But this is why we do need to have, eventually we need to have an international oversight system where, some countries get together and decide to implement this and then make sure to monitor and sanction countries that do not follow the system. We need to have, a carrot. We need to find ways to make it incentivize joining the system, but also, obviously, if there are defections, like in any other area of international law, they should be prevented and it should be, sanctioned and limited. And, a company that is trying to circumvent these measures should sanction. There should be incentives against doing these kind of things. But this is the kind of stuff that, for example, with a robust monitoring regime, even without on-chip mechanisms, is strongly solvable. And it's like this, it's solved by these approaches.
What if it turns out that using inference time compute is a really efficient way to get capability gains or performance gains? So you mentioned this earlier in the episode, but when you use ChatGPT and it's thinking about something that's inference time compute, it's not entirely public how that works, but it's somehow reflecting on its own output and getting to a better result. What if it turns out that techniques like those are perhaps a better use of compute than using compute for training bigger models? Does that kind of invalidate the whole regime of compute governance with these hardware mechanisms?
I think it challenges it, but it doesn't invalidate it. And also, this is precisely the reason why we draw out those safety conditions in phase 0 that go beyond just compute thresholds. So, like as we discussed earlier, compute is a very good proxy, but it's just one proxy. Ideally, we would have these, and we should build them, these clear metrics of intelligence and ability to predict over time, whether you put more inference time compute, less inference time compute. Also, the safety conditions were drawn out, and all of the various phases were drawn out in a paradigm agnostic way. So while obviously now we all have in our mind the kind of like current scaling LLMs plus RL plus other things as the main dominant paradigm, we should have systems that are, institutions that are robust enough to deal also with paradigm shifts. Scaling stops, but there's going to be other breakthroughs. This is a problem we need to solve at some point. If it's not via scaling, there might be like breakthroughs in RL that push us forward and other things like that. And so this is why the defensive depth approach of having some measures that limit the general intelligence of AI systems via compute. This is why we have a licensing regime. Some measures that are just fundamentally necessary, like no AIs improving AIs, no, unbounded AIs, no AIs that can break out of their environment. And we need to complement the compute approach with starting to build this understanding of intelligence at a theoretical and empirical level. And we should, for example, match them. One proposal that we have in our licensing regime is to have a measure of, we should test AIs and see how they perform against remote workers. And if they exceed the performance of remote workers, they should be equivalent to crossing a compute threshold. So this is to capture, a breakthrough in algorithmic efficiency that just makes them much more generally intelligent while still being below the compute threshold. We should have these other ways. We should have these fail-safes to capture that.
That sounds to me almost like a natural benchmark or something that will emerge in the wild if you have these services online where you can purchase, where you can make contracts with remote workers, and if it turns out that those remote workers begin being outcompeted by AI remote workers, well then you have a definite increase in capabilities. Whether or not that comes from another enormous model or better use of inference time compute or whatever that comes from, would you formalize that into a benchmark, or would you collect the data after the fact from these platforms online or from whatever source?
I think governments should start working on formalizing these benchmarks. This is kind of exactly how we build other sciences, starting from zero. Things like temperature. We started with people putting their left hand into a pot of cold water, their right hand putting into a pot of hot water, and then noting down the feeling of difference. You need to start somewhere and then bootstrap to a robust measurement science, to a robust metrology. And we should just start doing this with AI. Governments are luckily building up their capacity with things like the AI safety and evaluation institutes. This is a great place to start developing this. We should involve much more economists to do rigorous empirical studies. We see a lot of these things like, AI passed an IQ test, or AI passed an exam. That's great, but we need to do more. We need to do it formalized. We need to do it more. We need to have a big investment into this. We need to understand exactly at which levels AIs are. And that's going to be a good fail-safe to combine with the compute-based measures to catch exactly this like natural metric. Because ultimately, we know that us humans, as general intelligence, we can develop AI. So roughly, this is the big intuition behind AGI and superintelligence. If you have an AI that is as competent as a human, and they can do AI research and they can do AI activities as well as a human, you are facing a very quick, rapid acceleration into more and more powerful AI systems. We know we're capable of doing this. We know that machines are much faster than us. Once we cross the threshold of generally capable as a human, we are in the danger territory. So we should start actually measuring this yardstick. Yes, it's hard. Yes, the first tries are going to be not perfect, but this is how to start.
If we return to the issue of international cooperation, from the perspective of a country deciding whether to sign up for some international agreement, how are they making that decision? Well, they're thinking about the kind of benefits and costs, right? And so you write about how there should be benefits to cooperating with these international agreements and structures. Say you are in Nigeria, for example, and you're deciding whether to sign up. You might think, well, I mean, maybe I can grow faster. My economy can grow faster if I don't sign up, because these models can be very powerful. What can be offered on the other side? Which types of benefits can be offered for cooperating with these international structures?
Yes. So a fundamental and important point of an international structure is to also have these benefits for cooperation. So on one hand, again, there should be a clear incentive, and there should be the incentive should be made clear that if we don't cooperate, we are facing an existential level threat. This is global security. This is not, global security is national security. You are at risk as well. But it's good to add to this essentially a negative incentive, the positive incentive. We should have some of the most risky, but also potentially most beneficial AI development done in an international agency modeled similarly to the idea of a CERN for AI. In this plan, we call it GUARD, Global Unit for AI Research and Development, in which there will be security, like national security level protocols put in place that enable more advanced AI research than the one that is allowed to be done in private companies. And the benefits of this, once they're proven safe, they are shared to signatory countries. So you have on one hand the non-proliferation regime and monitoring regime via the IAA for AI, the International AI Safety Commission. And on the other hand, you have an outlet to channel, rather than devolving into competitive pressures, as you say, one country moving ahead on its own and trying to develop its own AI and risking to breach the superintelligence line accidentally or willingly. You have a joint effort to build powerful transformative AI technology that will then be given, proven safe, of course, to signatory countries to address challenges like fundamental scientific challenges, automating certain amounts of labor, and so on.
Wouldn't you expect many of these advances happening in the kind of AI or CERN for AI international research lab? Wouldn't those advances be dual use in the sense that, if you gain some knowledge, if you find out how to do something in a fundamentally better way, that can often be used for both good and bad. And so I would worry if I'm Nigeria thinking about whether to sign up. Would I actually receive these benefits? Would I be provided with the benefits of this CERN for AI?
Well, this is one of the things that is still going to be an issue even if we do solve AI control. That AI misuse will not go away. So in a similar fashion, so a controllable transformative AI is going to look in many ways like AlphaFold. You can imagine that AlphaFold, or a more powerful AlphaFold for most of chemistry and biology 5, while it's not going to be an adversary on its own, it's not going to be a generalist agent. If in the wrong hands, it's going to enable the development of novel pathogens, enable the development of synthetic biological agents that could, kill millions of people on the planet. So you will still face the issue of non-proliferation and misuse. This is just the nature of a powerful technology. But at least we will have solved the problem of losing control to the system itself. But this is why we do need to have an international agency that has very strong monitoring mechanisms, very strong safety protocols, national security level security in it, where only research that has been proven safe and safe by design can be released outside. or can be released via some more specialized channels, for example, only to the governments of the participating countries, but not just for open use, because indeed, this is going to be very powerful stuff, and it can still be weaponized even if if it's not a threat in itself on its own.
Let's talk about phase 2, which is about flourishing. So this sounded a little bit more cheery, perhaps, than talking about safety and security and so on. The main, or at least the first point that you argue in this phase, is that we need to develop a science of intelligence, what you might call a mature science of intelligence. What does that entail?
To build things that are reliable and controlled, we need to understand them, predict them, and measure them. This is how humanity has mastered a lot of domains. This is how we have, safe passenger planes that bring us in the air every day. This is how we, extract awesome energy from nuclear power plants. And this is how we're going to master AI if we do succeed. The situation at the moment is that we, as we've talked before, like a simple solution to the superintelligence problem would be if we could just know when the line at which too much intelligence leads to superintelligence. We could just draw a line there, apply a safety factor, like it's common in safety engineering, and stop before that. Get all of the intelligence from AI systems that we need and can harness safely without crossing the line into systems that can overpower us. We have a really hard time drawing this line right now because we don't have a science of intelligence and we don't have a measurement science of intelligence. We cannot directly measure this. We should build it. That's going to be the key to understanding, many more things about the universe, but also just fundamentally building AI systems that we can, in advance, predict how powerful they will be, exactly what they will be able to do, exactly what they will not be able to do, how much they can fail, and so we can make them fail gracefully. Think of the idea of when you build a nuclear power plant, you're required by law to showcase that it is not going to just collapse and explode if there is too much rainfall in your area, right? And we can do this because we understand physics. We understand nuclear physics. We have strong foundations in safety engineering, and we can do this. We can do this for a bridge carrying cars. We should get to the same level with intelligence and thus with AI. And so the first recommendation is let's build the science of intelligence. This is going to unlock a lot of benefits, but we need to do the hard work of building it, starting from empirical measurements, across AIs, and then building the general theory of understanding how all of this works.
And how is that different from what people are trying to do today in computer science, in psychology, in cognitive science, and so on? Aren't this seems like something that the kind of existing academics would be very interested in? Perhaps this is like this, they would see this as a real breakthrough, but we are not there yet. But how's this different from what people are already trying to do?
So I think especially in machine learning, there's been a bit of an inversion of priorities, where there's been kind of a continued chase of brittle benchmarks to just get capabilities to go up without actually trying to understand the deeper principles of this. There have been some good approaches recently, like a book, Principles of Deep Learning, that try to find the physical foundations of how deep learning works. But we essentially just need much more of that and much more of this rigorous scientific approach and of empirical testing that is rigorous and scientific that we can bootstrap on to build this science, and aimed at understanding how intelligence works and how to measure it, rather than just making the line go up the next brittle evil that gets gained very quickly. This is the modern history of machine learning in the past 10 years has been just benchmarks being made in quite a crude and simple fashion and being kind of gamed and smashed across over and over and over. There's a talk right now of saturation of benchmarks like MMLU and so on. Saturation meaning AIs are sometimes training even on the content of this benchmark. They're being directly optimized to beat the benchmark, and these benchmarks don't tell us much. This is why, like we talked before, we should have some grounded measures. By grounded, I mean just anchored in reality, things that we can just test against real phenomena that we see, things like, let's actually measure the performance of remote workers, and let's just compare AIs on exactly the same tasks. Not a toy, not a toy benchmark, not a list of multiple answers and questions, which is a common standard now, but let's run the AI on the same tasks. Let's see how it does. Let's see exactly where it fails. Let's bootstrap on that and build from that. And I think that's totally possible. This would be a very exciting scientific renaissance that could come from investing a lot more in these grounded approaches.
Yeah. Dan Hendricks, who is a previous guest on this podcast and the creator of MMLU and math and some of these benchmarks, is right now trying to create the most difficult kind of test for AI as possible. He calls it something like humanity's last exam or something like that. Just to give listeners a sense of kind of how models have just broken through these benchmarks, and we need new ones that are much more difficult in order to kind of keep up with AI development.
And I think in this case, I think a part of the issue is this focus on always making them harder for AIs. While, ultimately what we're interested in is not how hard is something for AIs. Like, this tells us very little. This can only tell us how one AI compares relative to another AI. What we really care about, and this is the approach presented here, is how do AIs compare to us, or like how do AIs compare to other intelligences, because we want to draw these kind of lines. So this is why I think we need, we obviously need more benchmarks in everything, but what we especially lack is these grounded benchmarks that don't just tell us whether Claude is, 2 points above ChatGPT, and we don't really know what this actually means in the real world, and more like, can Claude automate a salesperson? Can Claude automate a salesperson 80%, 90%? And those are ultimately the questions that policymakers need to have answers to, that, we need to have answers to plan our society around and to understand when we're crossing that line.
It's a very ambitious project trying to build a kind of fully general science of intelligence. I guess such a science would be able to kind of compare the intelligence of a squirrel with a human, with a current AI model, with a future AI model, and so on. So it's very ambitious. You mentioned that this is how we've made progress in other domains, and I'm somewhat skeptical here. I think if you look at the history of innovation, it seems that perhaps you get kind of tinkering and engineering, and then you get some product brought to market, and then it kind of fails, or it's somewhat unsafe, and then you iterate on that product and you get something better. So it's you get kind of product and engineering before you get a grand theory. And here I'm thinking perhaps of the steam engine or similar examples. But yeah, it seems like you don't have the grand theory before you have the product. So why would that be the case in the case of AI?
So in the case of AI, it's possible to build the product before having the grand theory. I mean, we're doing it right now. The issue with that is that we have no way to make it safe. So, and like with other technologies, you can, it's a tragedy, but it doesn't end human history to have one factory explode and then you can learn from it, one plane crash and then you can learn from it. But the reality is that when you're dealing with a technology where the blast radius is all of humanity, you're not going to have retries. So you're going to have very few, and you will have an enormous amount of damage before those. So we cannot afford to do that. But do we have a lot of ways to empirically test? I don't think this is a dichotomy. I think this is a false dichotomy. Like, as we've just discussed, we can do a lot of this empirical testing and bootstrapping from simpler problems to more complex problems. Like, let's just test right now, how do systems compare to humans across tasks? We used to have simpler, without having a grand theory, we used to have simpler measures like the Turing test. The Turing test has been the gold standard, and it's been like a commonly accepted metric of when is AI, crossing the real AI, as comparable to humans benchmark for a century, essentially. We've broken past that. The kind of first step to start to understand the phenomenon is to take goalposts seriously and not just keep shifting them. We should have a big moment of realization, like, yes, we've had a perhaps crude, but better than nothing measure, the Turing test, and we've broken past that. We have things like exams that we put humans on and AIs break those. Let's try to figure out what's going on. Let's get some signal from this and let's make better tests, grounded tests, and let's bootstrap our theory from that.
Yeah, it's interesting. The conclusion that some people have taken away from AIs, in some sense, passing the Turing test and passing very, very difficult exams and so on, is that these were never good tests and exams to begin with, right? And so it can sometimes be difficult to kind of update, to think about how should we update our beliefs in the face of this new evidence. But if we had a science of intelligence like you describe, I think that we would have much more clarity. Like if we had a science of intelligence like we have a science of physics, for example, there's very little room for disagreement, or much less room for disagreement.
Yeah, and going back on the iteration, so with nuclear, like if we did not have a understanding of nuclear physics when we started building nuclear weapons, imagine what would have happened, right? Like that's like a technology that has a much bigger radius, and we still made mistakes. Like we still made quite dangerous calculations. There's the famous episode of the makers of the first atomic bombs trying to calculate whether it would ignite the atmosphere and not being completely sure. Luckily it didn't, and they could do the calculations because they had a theory. Without a theory, you cannot even do those calculations. You're just in the dark. We've had examples of detonations that ended up having a blast radius of like multiple orders of magnitude larger than what the makers expected. They kind of like almost killed the pilot or led to massive fallout around. And this is even with the theory. In AI, we are working like that. We're working with a technology that will have a bigger blast radius than that without a theory, that would have been untenable with nuclear weapons.
Now, what we could get if we had a mature science of intelligence is some specification of what these systems can do and guarantees for what these systems cannot do. Maybe you could explain the advantages there, and how realistic is it to get a science so precise that you can guarantee things about AI systems?
Yeah, so this is another key component of like making transformative AI safe and controlled, and safe by design. And it's to have a way to specify what we actually want this AI to do, what we want this AI not to do, and so on. This approach is quite similar to actually like things that we already have in the realm of formal specifications and formal methods that are used in other areas of computer science, in nuclear engineering, and so on. Where the challenge is, how do you tell the AI that this is a no-go and this is not a no-go for all possible scenarios? This is not impossible. Like we do it. It's costly. It takes time, but we've made massive progress in this area in the past decades. What would have taken like decades of work, and formally proving systems is famously hard, but it's not impossible. And we've made massive breakthroughs on those.
Wait, what examples do we have of systems where we have formal proof that they aren't buggy, for example? What would be examples of software like that?
This has been an approach that has been used in some areas, like especially like military applications. Like there is some software for military helicopter software that we approach like this. There is some nuclear software that works like this. We also don't need to fully formally prove it, right? Like the kind of first step is like, let's approximate formally proving some core components of it, some core parts of it, formally proving it with within certain assumptions. We go back to the bounds point of like, if we don't give the AI, if we only give the AI this amount of compute and we put it in an environment where it doesn't access the internet, given this, we can show that it's not going to be able to do crazy things. Maybe it's going to explode a little bit, but not going to take over the world. And that's, eminently possible. And we're making massive progress on this, with partly thanks to AI. Without having to develop AGI or superintelligence, there's been very impressive breakthroughs by DeepMind with AlphaProof recently, where they've been using kind of a combination of systems to accelerate theorem proving and similar things that could also help with this. There's been work by Davidad and Joshua Benjo at ARIA in the UK, the innovation agency of the UK, who build this specification language for AI systems. We can already do this kind of stuff without waiting for a full general theory of intelligence. It's just a big effort. It requires some of the best minds of the planet put onto this. We need mathematicians, call to action, great mathematicians, great theoretical computer scientists. This is a great challenge to work on. Very important for humanity.
And perhaps something where we should devote more computing power and more AIs to try to help with the automated theorem proving and automated kind of verification of software. This would be if you could get a system like AlphaFold, but specifically for proving statements about software, that would be a great advance, I think.
Yes, and that's possible, and that would also stay in the realm of narrow AI systems, or bounded AI systems, where we know it's only doing that. It's not doing something else, and we can have it very powerful, but help us solve these problems.
So if we get the science of intelligence, if we go through the phases that you've described of safety, of stability, and of flourishing, then we are faced with a situation in which we can begin to automate cognitive labor and physical labor. This might be somewhat beyond the scope of a narrow path, but what do you foresee then? I mean, it's not as if all challenges are solved, right? Automating physical and cognitive labor would completely change society. And so do you think perhaps even if we have all of these steps secured, that we would still face great challenges?
Yeah, we will face great challenges, but we would be out of the extinction threat that comes from superintelligence. So, and we obviously don't have all the answers, and humanity doesn't have all the answers, and we should think really hard about those questions. Like, as you said, if we do succeed into implementing these phases, and we succeed at not having superintelligence, but building controlled transformative AI, AI that is a tool for us to automate anything that we want. And also there will be areas where we should decide as a society that we do not want to automate it. We don't want to delegate it to machines. That's a unsolved societal question of like, what are those areas and how much? Do we want to have politics automated? Do we want to still have our leaders be human or not? I think we should, but the real answer is that we should develop due processes where we make collective decisions together that are kind of justified and deliberated together. This is the spirit of democracy, to get these answers. And there will still be a lot of challenges that are unsolved. One big one is concentration of resources. By default, this is a technology that concentrates power, like whoever controls the development of this transformative technology and can essentially, at some point automate large amounts of labor, will have enormous power and enormous economic power and military power at their disposal. This is why we set up Guard in phase 1 to make sure that that there is a credible commitment to distributing these benefits to others as well, and there is not a single pole running away with it. So we will still need to solve the question, how do we distribute this wealth? How do we allocate it? Do we allocate it? Well, we'll keep facing a lot of challenges that we face right now, just amplified or in a radically different future, a radically positive future, but still filled with challenges. The idea, sometimes proponents, AI, superintelligence, just talk about when we achieve superintelligence and it's aligned, we achieve post-scarcity. In some ways, I think this is a bit of a misnomer. In some ways, we are post-scarcity in a lot of areas right now, especially compared to our ancestors. In other ways, scarcity will never go away. We will always have to make trade-offs. There are only a finite number of atoms in the universe.
In a very deep sense, we will never escape scarcity because we live in a physical universe. But we, as you say, we're kind of approaching scarcity in some domains, and we will perhaps approach scarcity or post-scarcity, in some domains, and we will approach post-scarcity in other domains.
Exactly. And we will still face trade-offs between things like explore versus exploit. We will have a technology that can just, we will need to make decisions. Do we invest a lot of this surplus into exploring the stars and settling on new planets and setting up new things? Or should we invest it to make everybody immediately extremely wealthy and have access to any material goods they want? Those things are not going to go away. Some things are never going away. And this is another reason why superintelligence as a dream is sometimes quite quite utopian in an ungrounded sense, because there are things that are just logical impossibilities or like moral impossibilities. Some people want other people to suffer. Is alignment satisfying their desire for others to suffer? This will contrast other people's desire. Some people want positional goods. They want to be the best at something. Only one person can be the best at something at any given point. How do you satisfy that? Human values are complex. We don't even know if there are like universal, full human values. And if there are, we should discover them, but we're not there yet. And a lot of these questions are not going to be answered by more technology. They're going to have to be answered by more, human tackling these questions and trying to find trade-offs, compromises. We will never get rid of compromises.
We will probably not satisfy all preferences fully. And if I'm not mistaken, I think we have some impossibility theorems that state that we cannot satisfy all preferences at the same time. As a final question, I would like us to explore how people can get involved. So if you're in politics, or if you're a technical person in computer science or a mathematician, perhaps lay out for us how you can get involved, and what you see as the most kind of fruitful areas to get involved.
In our path, we set out one path that we think is going to help humanity make it across the other side and survive superintelligence and thrive. And a lot of questions are unanswered. A lot of things will need to be strengthened, tested, adapted to specific contexts. A lot of technical challenges will need to be solved, which are really exciting. One of them is we will need much more work and much more bright minds on things like on-chip verification mechanisms. If you are interested in that, look into the current projects. Think about setting up your own project. This is going to be a growing area, and an area that we very, very much need for robust AI governance. People that work on benchmarks do work on grounded benchmarks. We would love to see governments, economists, and computer scientists working together to make these grounded benchmarks in reality, comparing actual economic performance of humans with performance of AIs to have clear metrics of what they can do. And for people in policy, if you are concerned about these risks and you're thinking about measures like this in your country, please get in touch. Also get in touch if you think there are ways to strengthen these measures. This is a very complex problem where nobody has a solution. And our goal with a narrow path was to go from 0 to 1. We didn't find a plan to deal with extinction risk from AI globally, so we made one. Now, we need all of you to make it better and to find the way that you can implement it, adapt it, transform it into real laws that can pass in your country, in your jurisdiction, and to make this into a reality. So if you have any ideas on that, please do get in touch at hello@narrowpath.co. That's the email that we use for all the feedback. And share it, share criticism, share feedback. Helps a lot.
Fantastic. Thanks for talking with me.
Thank you so much.